Hey guys! Tonight we step back into the 5th century, when the world is trembling under the hooves of horses and the shadow of a single man. You find yourself staring out at a horizon that seems to ripple with motion. Not waves, but cavalry. Countless riders sweeping across the endless grass. The ground shakes. The air tastes of smoke and iron. And at the heart of this unstoppable storm is Attila the Hun, a man so infamous, his very name becomes a bedtime warning, whispered to children across empires. He's the Scourge of God, the one Rome prays against, while Byzantium nervously mails off another chest of gold. And you, my friend, are right there, walking among the dust and fire of history, though you probably won't survive this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the windswept steppe, where the grass never seems to end. Out here, survival is measured in the endurance of horses, the sharpness of arrows, and the cunning of leaders. Among these nomadic people, tales travel faster than caravans. And one name is rising louder than the thunder of hooves: Attila. He isn't yet the legendary figure who will be etched into chronicles of terror. Right now, he's a young man of striking intensity, known for eyes that gleam with an unsettling fire. The Huns themselves are already a mystery to Rome. Short, stocky, fearsome horsemen who seem to spring from the misty east. Romans mutter that they're barely human, forged of demon blood and wolf spirits. Honestly, a little dramatic, but you know how people get when they're terrified. As you follow the Hun encampments, you notice the rhythm of life is tied to horses. Every child learns to ride before walking steadily. They drink mare's milk, stitch leather with practiced hands, and fire arrows backward while galloping forward. Skills that Roman cavalry could barely imagine, let alone master. The soundscape is constant: neighing, hammering iron, guttural chants, and the twang of bowstrings pulled taut. To outsiders, it feels alien, maybe even barbaric. To the Huns, it's just breakfast. But Attila is more than a horseman. He's a strategist. Historians record that by the early 440s, he and his brother, Bleda, co-ruled the Huns, leading a coalition of tribes that had once been prone to fracturing. This alone is a mainstream fact worth lingering on. Unity among the Huns was rare. They were notorious for splintering, feuding, and betraying one another for a shinier saddle. Yet somehow, this young warlord and his brother stitched them together into something like a kingdom, a terrifying one on horseback. Of course, unity with siblings is always temporary. Ask anyone who shared the back seat of a car on a summer road trip. By around 445, Bleda is dead. The chronicles say Attila had a hand in it. Scholars still argue whether it was fratricide, an accident, or a simple case of don't stand too close to Attila when he's ambitious. The quirky tidbit here: some sources claim Bleda's death came during a hunting accident, which is one of history's favorite euphemisms for, yeah, the king murdered his brother and blamed the deer. Either way, Attila emerges sole ruler, and from this moment, he becomes something else, something Rome will write fearful prayers about. You ride with him in your imagination, galloping across rivers and marshes as his warbands push into Roman provinces. To the Eastern Empire, he's a nightmare at the border. Cities along the Danube burn, fortresses collapse. Diplomats scurry to Constantinople, bearing tributes of gold to keep him appeased. But the thing about appeasing someone called the Scourge of God, it doesn't work for long. Like giving candy to a crocodile, it only teaches it to show up at your door again tomorrow. Pause for a moment. Take in the sensory image. You're sitting at a campfire at dusk, the vast plain stretching around you like an ocean. Smoke from roasting meat clings to your clothes, your ears still ringing from the day's march. Then over the firelight, you glimpse Attila himself. He isn't flashy. Unlike Roman emperors who adore purple robes and jewels, Attila dresses plainly, simple tunic, sword at his side, no golden crown. And that's the unsettling part. His lack of ostentation makes him stand out even more. It's as if he knows he doesn't need glittering symbols of power. He is the symbol. His warriors look at him with a blend of awe and fear. The chronicles say he was short, broad-chested, with a flat nose, a swarthy complexion, and eyes that pierced straight through you. Not conventionally handsome by Roman standards. But charisma isn't about cheekbones. It's about presence. When Attila speaks, entire armies lean in. You feel it too, as though his words tether you like a hawk's leash on a falcon. Now, here's a quirky detail you can't help but notice. The Huns were famous for head binding. They sometimes elongated the skulls of infants by binding them tightly with cloth, creating a cone-shaped head as they grew. The practice was both cultural and intimidating. Romans wrote of it with disgust, while the Huns probably thought, well, it makes us look scarier. Imagine meeting a rider with a tall, stretched skull and a horse that won't stop moving. It's nightmare fuel. Attila himself may or may not have had such a head shape, but the effect among his people was unmistakable. Meanwhile, Roman chroniclers start branding him the Scourge of God. They genuinely believed his invasions were divine punishment for their sins. You almost have to laugh at the PR department in late Rome. Every bad thing had to be a cosmic judgment. Lost a province? God's angry. Burned your toast? Attila's fault. Yet, the fear wasn't entirely irrational. Attila's campaigns carved through Europe with astonishing speed. His cavalry could appear seemingly out of nowhere, moving faster than Roman scouts could report. Fields were stripped bare, cities left in ruins, and the man at the center of it seemed unstoppable, a phantom cloaked in plain cloth, riding a dark horse across the apocalypse. But here's where the scholarly debate cracks open. What really drove Attila? Was he just a plunderer, obsessed with gold and tribute? Or did he dream of empire, something lasting that rivaled Rome itself? Historians still argue whether Attila was merely the most effective raider in history or a proto-state builder whose premature death cut short a true empire. The evidence, frustratingly, points both ways. As the stars spread over the dark steppe sky, you find yourself drowsing by the fire, hearing laughter in strange, rough languages. the neigh of restless horses, and the deep silence whenever Attila stands. You can feel the weight of his gaze, even across the crowd. This is not just another warlord. This is the man who will march to the gates of Rome. The Scourge of God has risen, and you, poor traveler, are caught in the wake of his storm. You wake to the cold breath of the steppe, the kind of chill that doesn't just kiss your skin, but sneaks straight into your bones. Morning light spills across the horizon in broad, honey-colored bands, and you realize the camp is already buzzing. Horses snort, paw the frozen ground, and shake frost from their manes. Fires smoke with the smell of mutton fat and sour milk simmering in leather flasks. This, messy, loud, a little smelly, is Hun life at its core, and you're smack in the middle of it. The Huns don't do tidy cities or marble forums. Their world is the open plain, flat enough that you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. Their homes, portable. Tents made from felt and leather stretch across the grasslands like a patchwork quilt. Inside, rugs and furs soften the earth floor, and every corner tells you something about survival. Bows strung high where kids can't tinker with them. Pots of curdled milk left to ferment into kumis. The favorite drink that tastes like yogurt went a little too wild. You try a sip. It's sour, fizzy, with a faint kick of alcohol. The Huns drink it like water. You gag, and a boy of about 8 laughs, already balancing on a pony, half his size. Out here, saddle before school. Children are raised as riders, which is both practical and terrifying. Before their teeth finish coming in, Hun kids are being strapped on the saddles. By 5, they're shooting toy arrows while bouncing over prairie mole hills. By 7, they can ride at full gallop and loose arrows backwards, which is about the age you are probably still working on tying your shoes. The horse isn't just transport, it's family, currency, and battlefield advantage rolled into one. If you lost your horse, you might as well lose your life. Daily rhythm on the steppe isn't glamorous. You see women churning milk, scraping hides, weaving felt. Men tend herds, check bows, or gather with others to plan raids. You note one mainstream fact here. The Huns were not simply marauders, they were expert pastoralists. They managed vast herds of horses, sheep, and cattle, moving seasonally to keep the grass fresh. Their economy relied on mobility, not farmland, which baffled Romans used to walls and vineyards. To the Hun mind, being tied to one spot seemed like begging to be conquered. Better to ride, always ready to move like the wind. Food is lean, sometimes brutal. Horse meat stews, wild game, milk, and bread baked on hot stones make up the menu. There's a quirky tidbit. Ancient writers claimed the Huns softened meat by placing it under their saddles while riding, letting sweat, friction, and hours of trotting tenderize dinner. Picture it. You're handed a strip of beef that's just been saddle marinated. Bon appetit, whether that's exaggerated or not. The image alone tells you how Romans thought of them. Equal parts, inventive, and gross. As the day goes on, you notice subtle details about Hun appearance. Many shave their hair, close, but leave braids trailing. Beards are trimmed short or absent. Tattoos are rare. Scars are common. And some skulls are elongated from infant binding. Tall domes that make them look alien to Roman eyes. You imagine a Roman merchant stumbling into camp and trying not to stare. To the Huns, though, it's normal, maybe even beautiful. It sets them apart as a people of the steppe. The heart of Hun power isn't just in arrows and horses. It's in loyalty to clan and leader. Families gather in circles. Men debate disputes, while elders mutter judgments. But there's also laughter. Children chase each other with sticks. Dogs bark at everything. Musicians pluck fiddles made from horsehair. Life is hard, yes, but it isn't endless gloom. Around evening fires, stories are told, some bawdy, some epic. One about a warrior who shot 3 deer in 1 arrow. Definitely exaggerated, but the kids love it. Humor, even among the barbarians, keeps the darkness at bay. Still, beneath the warmth of firelight lies a constant undertone of readiness. Weapons are never far. Saddles are always packed. A Hun family can take down a tent, load wagons, and ride out within hours if trouble comes. That mobility terrifies settled neighbors. Because how do you fight someone who refuses to stay still? The Romans learned this the hard way. Walls mean little when your enemy can simply ride around, appear in another valley, and vanish again before the legions even march. You lie back on a rug, staring at the endless stars, and hear the camp drift into half-sleep. Horses are tethered in a circle. Warriors murmur last words. A baby cries somewhere in the dark. Out here, night feels immense, like the whole sky is swallowing you. And still, you can sense the looming shadow of Attila, though tonight is about his people, not yet his legend. Historians still argue whether the Huns left a cultural legacy beyond terror. Did they bring techniques, traditions, even words into Europe? Or did they vanish with Attila's death, leaving only fear in memory? The debate lingers, like campfire smoke in your clothes. What you know for sure, lying there on the vast plain, is that Hun life is built on motion, survival, and the deep bond between rider and horse. You might survive a raid, you might survive winter, but you'll never survive trying to keep up with these people on foot. The morning comes not with roosters, because roosters don't belong out here, but with the restless nickering of horses. The camp stirs like a hive. Men mount up with their bows across their backs. Women roll up felt tents in practiced sweeps. Children cling to saddles with one hand and gnaw on strips of dried meat with the other. The world of the Huns is already in motion, but now all eyes turn toward a single figure, Attila. He isn't just another chief with a few loyal horsemen. No, he's the one who has somehow woven together the wild, quarrelsome threads of Hun clans into something like a tapestry, even if it's stitched with blood. You stand in the midst of it, wondering how in the world one man convinces such a storm of riders to follow him. The first thing you notice is that the Huns don't exactly do democracy. Sure, there are councils of nobles, and yes, clans each have their elders, but real power flows from strength, military, political, and sometimes mystical. Attila combines all 3. He knows how to win battles, he knows how to play tribes against each other, and he cultivates the aura of destiny. Some whisper that his rise was foretold, that he carries the favor of the gods. You feel it in the way people glance at him. Half fear, half worship. Mainstream history tells us Attila didn't rise alone. He first shared the throne with his brother, Bleda, after inheriting power in 434. Two brothers at the top. Sounds like a buddy cop drama, but less high fives, more raiding villages. Together, they negotiated treaties with the Eastern Roman Empire, squeezing tribute out of Constantinople. Gold flowed in, Roman merchants squirmed, and the Huns grew rich. But the thing about brothers ruling together, it rarely lasts. And you already know how this ends. By 445, Bleda is gone, probably dead by Attila's own hand. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some accounts say Attila orchestrated Bleda's death during a hunting trip, which might be the oldest "we were hunting." And then, oops, excuse, in leadership history. It's almost too convenient. No witnesses, no crime. Just one brother coming back from the woods, while the other mysteriously doesn't. The steppe is full of dangers, but let's be honest. Lions, tigers, and bears are nothing compared to ambitious siblings. After that, Attila rules alone. And the Huns? They don't just accept it, they thrive under it. Imagine dozens of rival chiefs, each with their own horsemen, suddenly forced to answer to one man. It could have collapsed in a heartbeat. Instead, Attila somehow makes it work. He's ruthless, yes, but he's also pragmatic. He rewards loyalty with plunder. He tolerates dissent just long enough to crush it. And he knows when to terrify and when to charm. The result? A confederation of tribes that starts to look suspiciously like a proto-state. Not an empire in marble, but an empire on horseback. You sit at the edge of a council fire one night, and you watch the chiefs debate. Some shout, some sneer, some wave their hands like they're directing invisible orchestras. Then Attila speaks, low and steady, never raising his voice. The room, or rather, the tent, quiets instantly. His charisma doesn't come from volume. It comes from conviction. He doesn't say, "Follow me because I'm your ruler." He says, "Follow me because I will lead you to gold, victory, and fear in the hearts of Romans." And really, who doesn't want a little gold with their glory? A debate still stirs among historians. Was Attila's power personal charisma, or was it structural necessity? Did he simply have the right personality at the right time? Or were the tribes destined to consolidate under someone to survive against Rome and other enemies? The sources don't make it clear, so you're left pondering whether Attila was unique or just uniquely lucky. Meanwhile, you watch his warriors. They're not a uniform army like Rome's legions, but they have cohesion. They drill on horseback, loosing arrows in tight formation, charging in waves. They wear lamellar armor, patchwork, but effective, and their confidence sky high. They believe their king has divine favor. One rumor spreading through camp says Attila owns a sacred sword, a blade dropped from the heavens, proof that he's chosen by the gods of war. Whether it's true or just propaganda, it works. Because when a warrior thinks he's riding under heaven's endorsement, he rides harder. Still, you notice Attila isn't obsessed with pomp. Unlike emperors wrapped in purple or Byzantine generals dripping in silk, Attila dresses simply. Plain tunic, modest belt, no gleaming jewels. He eats the same food as his men. His tent is well kept, but not excessive. This restraint makes him stand out. It tells his people, "I'm not above you, I'm with you," which is, ironically, the best way to stay above them. At a feast, you hear jokes fly about Roman decadence. They bathe every day? No wonder they're soft. Another adds, they eat peacocks and olives while we eat horse. No wonder their bellies wobble. You chuckle, though you silently admit a hot bath doesn't sound half bad. Attila himself smiles faintly at these quips, but doesn't laugh. He's always watching, always calculating. Even in moments of levity, he seems half-focused on the next conquest. The truth is, you're witnessing the making of a king. Not a king with a crown and palace, but a king who commands loyalty because he embodies the spirit of his people. He is harsh, but so is the steppe. He is relentless, but so are the horses that gallop day after day. He is feared, but also necessary. Without him, the fragile confederation might dissolve. With him, it becomes the nightmare of empires. You crawl into your borrowed rug that night, listening to the muffled sounds of feasting in the distance. You wonder if Attila ever sleeps soundly. With so much power balanced on his shoulders, with so many enemies sharpening daggers in the dark. Can he? Or is he always half awake? Eyes open in the dark, mind racing with visions of conquest. Whatever the answer, one fact is clear. The Huns now have a king who is more than just a barbarian. He's Attila, Lord of the Horsemen, Master of Tribes, and the man who will soon make the whole world tremble. The crackle of the campfire fades into the faint hum of voices speaking in a language you don't quite grasp. Roman Latin, sharp and clipped, trading words with the guttural cadence of Hun interpreters. You shift closer, peering past the circle of horsemen to where the real theater of the night unfolds. No, not the war dances or the children wrestling in the dirt. This is subtler, slipperier, diplomacy. And if you thought swordplay was dangerous, wait until you watch Attila work his magic over a treaty. You see, for all his reputation as a ruthless horse lord, Attila is as much a politician as a warrior. The Romans, both east and west, learned this the hard way. They call him barbarian, but they keep sending embassies, gifts, and gold, because sometimes it's cheaper to buy peace than to fight for it. And Attila knows it. He bleeds empires, not only with arrows, but with contracts. Take Constantinople, for instance. The Byzantine court spends a fortune trying to keep the Huns on a leash. In 435, they signed the Treaty of Margus, which, here's the mainstream fact, guarantees the Huns an annual tribute in gold in exchange for not raiding. Rome pays off its nightmare neighbor. Like a landlord you can't stand but can't evict. At first, it's 700 pounds of gold per year. By the mid-440s, after Attila flexes his muscles, it jumps to 2,100 pounds. That's a threefold rent hike, with no option to move out. You can almost hear the imperial accountants weeping into their scrolls. And yet, Attila never trusts a deal. Treaties to him are paper saddles, They look impressive, but try riding one into battle. He uses agreements like stepping stones, collecting gold while watching for weakness. If the Byzantines miss a payment, or insult a Hun envoy, or sneeze in the wrong direction, he's back across the Danube with fire and fury. Tonight, you watch as a Roman envoy, stiff robe, stiff beard, stiff posture, tries to maintain dignity while surrounded by Hun warriors, gnawing bones. The envoy clears his throat, demanding that the Huns respect the border near the river. Attila leans forward, expression unreadable, and lets the silence stretch. He finally speaks through his interpreter, voice steady, low. We will respect the border when Rome respects its promises. Oof, you almost feel bad for the envoy. Almost. Here's the quirky tidbit. Priscus, a Byzantine diplomat and historian, once visited Attila's camp and left behind a vivid description. He was shocked to find that Attila's lifestyle was simpler than his nobles. The other chiefs drank from golden cups and dined off silver plates. But Attila used plain wooden utensils, refusing to indulge. The envoy noted this plainness as both strange and powerful. It made him seem larger than life. Imagine walking into a room expecting a barbarian king dripping in jewels, only to find him eating off IKEA-tier tableware. That kind of flex doesn't come from wealth. It comes from confidence. Now back to the double deals. Rome isn't just negotiating in good faith. It's also playing spy games. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines actively plotted Attila's assassination through their envoys. Some accounts hint at secret offers to Hun nobles, attempts to bribe disloyal chiefs, even whispers of poison. Nothing concrete survives, but it's clear both sides were suspicious. Imagine the tension of every banquet. Is that roasted lamb seasoned with herbs or just a dash of arsenic? And do you dare refuse the plate without offending the host? Diplomacy, step style, is never boring. From your perch near the fire, you notice the body language. The Romans sit stiff, nervous, clutching their robes as though fabric could shield them. The Huns lounge, legs sprawled, laughing at off-color jokes, occasionally spitting into the dirt. They know they have the upper hand. After all, the Romans are the ones who traveled here to beg for peace, not the other way around. But Attila is no fool. He doesn't humiliate envoys outright. He keeps the negotiations just respectful enough, letting them carry messages home to Constantinople or Ravenna that he is reasonable for now. That balance, intimidation with a sprinkle of restraint, is why he succeeds where so many raiders before him failed. He isn't just a hammer. He's also a scalpel. You drift a little in the fire's warmth, imagining the gold caravans trundling across Europe, chests heavy with coins, guarded nervously, delivered into Attila's hands. You wonder how Rome explains this to its citizens. Good news, citizens. We've bought peace by sending half the treasury north. Don't worry, your taxes will cover it. The irony is thick enough to spread on bread. Later that night, when the envoys are gone and the fires dim, you overhear Hun chiefs debating. Some want to raid Constantinople anyway. Others prefer the gold. Attila listens, says little, and finally ends the argument with a few calm words. His ability to control these volatile personalities is a spectacle in itself. You realize this isn't just a barbarian camp, it's a court, rough and wild, but still a center of power, where decisions reshape continents. And through it all, one truth hardens in your mind. Attila thrives on diplomacy as much as on battle. He's the kind of man who can sack your city one year and dine with your ambassador the next, all while raising the rent on your tribute payments. The Scourge of God doesn't just ride with cavalry. He sits at the bargaining table too, and somehow always leaves with the better hand. The steppe wind fades behind you as you find yourself rattling along on the edge of something much larger than horse herds and tribute caravans. The ground beneath your feet is no longer endless grass. It's the rutted road of empire, and the air is thick with dust, sweat, and the metallic tang of weapons. The year is 451, and Attila has made his choice. No more haggling over borders with Byzantium. No more gold-choked treaties. He turns his gaze west, where Gaul, modern France more or less, waits like a ripe harvest. And you, somehow, are tagging along on the most terrifying road trip of the 5th century. Picture it, an army so vast that Roman chroniclers inflated the numbers into the hundreds of thousands. Was it really that many? Historians still argue whether Attila commanded 200,000 riders, or closer to 50,000. But either way, it's enormous for the time. Wave after wave of horsemen, not just Huns, but a whole confederation of allies. Ostrogoths, Gepids, Alans, Burgundians, and every tribe that figured better to ride with Attila than be trampled under him. You stand at the edge of a hill one morning and watch them stretch across the horizon, a living river of hooves and banners. It's breathtaking, terrifying, and honestly, a little smelly. Imagine several tens of thousands of horses relieving themselves in unison. Yeah, the glamour fades quickly. The mainstream fact here: Attila's campaign into Gaul wasn't just random pillaging. He was aiming to extend his influence into the Western Roman Empire, and perhaps cement himself as a kingmaker. Some accounts suggest he even planned to install his own man, or himself, as ruler of Gaul. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a calculated move. You feel it in the deliberate pace of the march. Cities fall in order: Metz, Trier, Strasbourg, each leaving behind smoldering ruins. Attila's riders sweep through like locusts, leaving famine and fear trailing in their wake. And then there are the churches. Attila's men loot relics, burn sanctuaries, and drive terrified villagers westward. But quirky detail incoming. Some chroniclers claim Attila spared certain cities if they invoked saints or offered up relics. One story says he hesitated at Paris, supposedly turned back by the prayers of a woman, later canonized as Saint Genevieve. Was it divine intervention or just a logistical hiccup? Hard to say. But to the people left alive, it was miracle enough. You march with a column, and the sensory overload is relentless. The pounding of hooves never stops. Drums beat a rhythm that carries for miles, a soundtrack of dread. Smoke rises constantly from behind, because wherever Attila goes, fire follows. At night, camps sprawl across fields, flickering with thousands of torches. It's less like a military encampment and more like a mobile nation on the move. Families travel with warriors, herds trail behind, carts creak under plunder. You try to sleep, but the roar of horses, the bawdy laughter of soldiers, and the occasional shriek of a captured prisoner keep you awake. And yet, the mood in the Hun camp is almost jubilant. Warriors boast of victories, compare loot, and carve runes into their bows. To them, Gaul is a land of fat spoils and trembling enemies. To the Roman world, though, it feels like the sky is falling. One evening, you overhear a debate between Attila's generals. Should they push straight for the Rhone or swing toward Orleans? Attila listens, stroking his beard, weighing the options. He doesn't need to shout. His silence commands attention, and when he finally speaks, it's with quiet certainty. The plan: Orleans. The city is rich, strategically important, and defended by Roman and Visigothic forces that Attila seems almost eager to crush. Historians still argue whether Attila's march on Gaul was driven more by political ambition or by personal grievance. One colorful theory is that he was lured west by a marriage proposal. Honoria, the sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III, had supposedly sent Attila a plea for help, and her ring when her brother tried to marry her off against her will. Attila interpreted this as a proposal and demanded half the Western Empire as her dowry. Talk about shooting your shot. Valentinian refused, obviously, and Attila decided to press the matter with an army. Was this whole invasion sparked by one desperate letter? Scholars debate it endlessly, and you can't help but smirk. Imagine swiping right and getting an invasion instead of a date. By the time the Hun horde reaches Orleans, panic has spread like wildfire. Refugees cram the roads, priests carry relics in frantic processions, and cities slam their gates. But the Romans are not entirely helpless. Flavius Aetius, Rome's last great general, rallies his allies. Visigoths under King Theodoric, Franks, and remnants of Roman legions. It's an unlikely coalition, more frenemies than friends, but united by one goal: stop Attila. The air before Orleans feels electric. The Huns besiege the city, battering its gates, storming its walls. Inside, defenders pray desperately as messengers ride to Aetius. Just when Orleans seems doomed, the coalition army arrives, forcing Attila to withdraw north, toward the plains near Catalonian fields. You don't know it yet, but you're about to witness one of the bloodiest confrontations in ancient history. Still, as you drift that night in the Hun camp, the fire painting shadows across weary faces, you sense that Attila relishes the challenge. He hasn't just come for plunder. He's here to test himself against Rome's last strength, to etch his name deeper into history. The march on Gaul isn't an ending. It's a drumbeat leading to a battle that will shake the continent. You hear the ground first, low, like distant thunder. It's not a storm though. No rain clouds, no flash of lightning on the horizon. It's hooves, tens of thousands of them, beating the earth of northern Gaul into something that quivers beneath your sandals. You shift your weight, try to steady yourself, but the plain itself seems alive, shuddering as though the land knows what's about to happen. The Catalonian plains, sometimes called the Campus Mariacus, aren't dressed up for the occasion. Just rolling grassland, Dust swirling in the heat. A couple of shallow rises. It doesn't look like history's stage. And yet, tonight, under the sinking sun, it's going to become one of the bloodiest theaters Europe has ever known. You stand amid the Hunnic host, but it's not just Huns around you. Attila has called in his patchwork confederation: Ostrogoths, Gepids, Siri, Rugi, Alans, who switched sides twice before breakfast. It's a giant medieval group project, except instead of PowerPoints and passive-aggressive emails, the deliverables are severed limbs and flaming villages. And across the field, the Romans, or what still counts as Romans. Aetius, the last of the old guard, commanding an army that's just as mixed up. Visigoths under King Theodoric, Franks, Burgundians, Armoricans, even some Saxons who probably just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. If you squint, you can almost laugh. It's less two nations clashing, more like Europe's entire tribal roster turning up for the same party and deciding the only way to sort things out is with pointy sticks. Attila himself waits in the center, high on a wooden platform, like some unblinking hawk. His horse shifts beneath him, black mane tossing, nostrils steaming. He doesn't shout. He doesn't have to. His presence is enough. He's called the Scourge of God for a reason. And right now, he's about to unleash it. He holds back his army at first, letting the Romans and their allies make their move. Strategy, not just savagery. That's the key detail you tuck away. For all the stories of him drinking out of enemy skulls, the man knows how to play the long game. The dust thickens as the first Visigoth cavalry charge slams into the Hunnic flanks. The sound is like a thunderclap, followed by the rending of metal. Horses scream, men howl, shields splinter. You're caught between watching and bracing, because at any second, your section of the line could be next. Arrows whistle overhead. The Hun bowmen are doing their thing, loosing volleys in curved arcs, so the shafts rain down like angry locusts. That's the Hun specialty, their bread and butter since the steppe days. Fire, retreat, fire again. Skirmish until the enemy's nerves fray like old rope. And yet here, on this crowded plain, with no room to maneuver, it's not as easy. The Romans press forward, their shield walls holding, their allies filling the gaps. Here's the mainstream fact. This battle, fought in 451 CE, is often described as one of the last great showdowns of the Western Roman Empire. Not because the empire was strong, but because Aetius somehow wrangled every half-willing ally into showing up, like the universe gave Rome one last hurrah before pulling the curtain. The quirky tidbit: supposedly, Attila, terrified of losing, had a giant funeral pyre built behind his camp. He allegedly planned to throw himself into the flames rather than be captured alive. Picture that, Europe's scariest warlord, prepping his own bonfire exit strategy just in case things went south. And here's where historians still argue. Did Attila actually lose this battle? Or was it more of a bloody stalemate? The sources, Jordanes, Prosper of Aquitaine, can't agree. One side says Attila was beaten back, humiliated. Another suggests he withdrew strategically, still powerful enough to terrorize Italy a year later. The truth, hidden under layers of dust and blood, may never be pinned down. The clash reaches a fever pitch when King Theodoric himself, leader of the Visigoths, rides straight into the melee. Imagine the king of an entire people, not sitting back, sipping watered wine, but charging, spear in hand, beard flying in the wind. And then, in the chaos, he's killed, trampled beneath horses, pierced by spears. It's unclear, but his fall ripples through both armies. The Visigoths howl for revenge, driving themselves harder into the Hun lines. Attila, sensing disaster, pulls his men back toward the wagon laager he'd set up. A massive defensive circle of wagons, chained and fortified, like a makeshift fortress in the middle of nowhere. From behind those walls, the Huns continue firing arrows, daring anyone to break them. Night falls. The field is a horror show of twisted bodies, riderless horses, broken spears jutting up like grave markers. You pick your way through it, the stink of blood and churned mud in your nose, listening to groans that don't stop. Some men whisper prayers to Christ, others to Woden or Mars, others to gods whose names are already half forgotten. You realize you're stepping through a graveyard made in a single day. And still, across the dark plain, the Huns wait. Attila doesn't ride away. He sits inside his wagon fort, surrounded by fires, his men chanting low and eerie. He hasn't lost everything. He hasn't won either. The next morning, no one moves. Aetius, maybe fearing that too decisive a victory would make the Visigoths too strong, doesn't press the attack. Attila, staring out from his circle of wagons, calculates. If he stays, he might be crushed. If he leaves, he can spin it as a tactical retreat. So he withdraws, his army intact, his myth unbroken. The Catalonian plains become one of those battles where both sides claim victory and neither side feels like celebrating. You walk off the field, your boots caked with mud, and worse, your ears still ringing with the roar of thousands. The air tastes of ash. Somewhere out there, Attila is already plotting his next move. Italy trembles on the horizon, and you probably won't get a good night's sleep for weeks after what you've just seen. You stumble out from the smoke and clash of the Catalonian fields, where the dust has barely settled, and already the rumors are flying. Word travels faster than arrows. Attila, the unstoppable storm of the steppes, has been checked. Not destroyed, not erased, but slowed. And in the ancient world, slowing a man like Attila is a lot like throwing a bucket of water at a wildfire. It hisses, steams, and then, if you're unlucky, it spreads in new, unpredictable directions. That's the mood as you trail the remnants of the Hunnic horde back toward their camps. A strange mix of exhaustion, pride, and dread. Because you know as well as anyone, Attila doesn't stay down. He pivots, he adapts, he points those restless riders somewhere else. And somewhere else, unfortunately, looks suspiciously like Italy. The great debate starts right there in the campfires. Historians still argue whether Attila's defeat at Catalonian plains was really a defeat at all. Yes, Aetius and his coalition had forced the Huns to pull back. Yes, Attila's aura of invincibility was dented. But Attila still had an army, still had wealth, and still had the sharpest tool of all: his sheer reputation as the Scourge of God. Some scholars even suggest that Attila cleverly retreated on purpose, conserving strength for a fresh strike at Rome itself. That's the terrifying part. When your enemy turns from Gaul to Italy, you don't exactly feel like celebrating. You follow the Huns as they regroup along the Danube, then roll southward like a storm front gathering speed. Italy, land of vineyards and marble cities, is about to hear the thunder of horse hooves. By 452, Attila is pressing across the Alps, pushing his riders through narrow passes where echoes of hooves bounce off cliffs like war drums. Villages scatter, towns fall silent, and you, trailing in his wake, notice the pattern. Wherever the Huns ride, fear gallops ahead of them. Mainstream fact here: Attila's invasion of Italy in 452 is one of the most famous moves in his career. He swept through northern cities like Aquileia, which was besieged and, according to sources, so thoroughly razed that later generations had trouble even finding where it once stood. Imagine that. A city so wiped away that its ghost becomes hard to trace. That's the kind of destruction people whisper about long after. And in your ears, those whispers mingle with the smell of smoke, the taste of ash, the sight of families trudging south with everything they can carry. Quirky detail. Some writers claim Attila's army was shadowed not just by refugees, but by herds of animals they couldn't resist stealing. Cows, goats, even geese. So the soundscape of the Hunnic March isn't just war horns and hoofbeats. It's the constant honking and bleating of livestock, dragged along like an accidental orchestra. You can picture it, a terrifying warlord, riding at the head of his men, and behind them, a ruckus of geese screaming bloody murder. Somewhere in that contrast, deadly horsemen and ridiculous barnyard chorus, you almost crack a smile. Almost. But then Rome itself looms. That eternal city, once mistress of the world, now stands nervously behind its crumbling defenses. And here's where the story takes one of its strangest turns. Instead of charging straight at Rome, Attila halts. He camps, he negotiates, and he receives none other than Pope Leo the Worse, who rides out to meet the king of the Huns. The meeting has become one of history's most famous showdowns. What was said, no one can know for certain. Did Leo threaten Attila with divine punishment? Did he promise tribute? Was it simple exhaustion and lack of supplies that stopped the Hun tide? Historians still argue whether Attila was cowed by religion, persuaded by politics, or simply pragmatic. But you, watching the two figures, one in humble papal robes, the other in furs and iron, sense a different kind of battle, a quiet battle of words, gestures, and spiritual authority. And the wildest part? Rome is spared. Attila turns back. You trudge alongside the retreating horde once more, feeling the strange anticlimax. The Scourge of God had marched on Rome's doorstep, only to pull away. You don't know yet, but a decision, that moment of turning, will set the stage for everything to come. His final feasts, his strange death, the whispers of curses and conspiracies that will haunt his name forever. Picture the scene, the summer of 452, hot air shimmering above the stones of northern Italy, fields scorched and villages deserted. Attila the Hun has just left a trail of rubble behind him, Aquileia has fallen, burned so completely that later chroniclers say even the storks abandoned its charred rooftops. Verona has trembled, Milan has emptied, and refugees clog the roads like a river of misery flowing southward. At the head of it all rides Attila, the Scourge of God, his riders bristling with spears, their horses snorting clouds of steam. The road leads straight toward Rome itself, the eternal city, once conqueror of worlds, now waits in fear. And then, something strange. Instead of smashing the gates, Attila pauses. He sets up camp on the plain of the Mincio River, close enough to taste the marble dust of Rome, but far enough to listen, to wait. That's when word spreads. The Pope is coming. You stand in the sun as a small procession approaches. Nothing like the roaring horde you're used to. No cavalry charges, no glittering banners, just a handful of attendants, solemn faces, and at the center, Pope Leo XIV, the Bishop of Rome. His robes are white but dusty from the road. His expression, calm, as if he's walking into a church service, rather than the camp of the most feared man alive. And there's something in the air. You can feel it. The murmur of thousands of horsemen dying down. The hush of expectation. It's like even the wind holds its breath. Here's the mainstream fact. This meeting between Pope Leo and Attila is one of the most famous diplomatic encounters of the late ancient world. And the kicker, we don't actually know what was said. Some Roman sources claim Leo persuaded Attila with words alone, invoking God's authority to protect the city. Others hint at tribute, bags of gold discreetly handed over. A few even suggest Attila was simply out of supplies, his men starving, his horses sick, his army too stretched to risk a siege. But history loves drama. And so the legend forms that a single, unarmed pope turned back the terror of the steppes. From where you stand in the crowd, you can see Attila's eyes fixed on Leo. The Hun king doesn't fidget, doesn't laugh, doesn't bellow orders. He just listens, stone-faced. Later storytellers will embroider this silence with supernatural flair. Some say Attila saw a vision. Behind Leo, the apostles Peter and Paul, holding swords, warning him that Rome was under divine protection. Others claim Attila felt a chill, a weight pressing on his chest, as if the heavens themselves had shifted against him. Whether you believe in miracles or not, there's no denying, the moment has power. Quirky detail. According to one colorful source, Attila was so impressed, or perhaps unsettled, that he actually invited Leo into his tent for a feast. Imagine that, the Scourge of God politely hosting the Bishop of Rome over dinner. You can picture the awkwardness. Hunnic warriors gnawing roasted meat with greasy fingers, while the Pope delicately dips bread in wine. Somewhere between a council of war and a very bizarre dinner party. And here's the scholarly debate. Did Leo really save Rome? Or was Attila's retreat inevitable? Many historians point out that Italy was suffering from famine and plague at the time. Supplies were scarce. Attila's men were hungry and weakened, and disease may have already begun gnawing at the horde. Rome, with its thick walls and desperate population, would not have been an easy prize. Perhaps Attila used the meeting as a graceful exit, a way to withdraw, without admitting defeat. After all, if you tell the world you were persuaded by a pope and visions of saints, you don't lose face. You gain mystique. Whatever the reason, you witness the outcome. After the meeting, Attila gives the order. The banners turn north. The horses shift. The entire horde, this engine of terror that seemed destined to wipe Rome from the map, begins to retreat. And the eternal city is spared. It feels anticlimactic in the moment. You half expect trumpets, angels, maybe a bolt of lightning. Instead, it's just the slow creak of wagons, the groan of wheels, the tramp of hooves as the storm rolls away. But you know, deep down, you've just seen history bend. A pope stood in front of a barbarian king, and somehow, impossibly, the city still stands behind you. And as you watch the dust cloud of the Hun retreat drift into the horizon, you wonder which story will survive the centuries. The miracle, the gold, or the practical truth? Maybe all of them. Because sometimes history prefers legends to footnotes. The dust hasn't even settled on the road from Rome when the campfires of the Huns spark again. Attila may have turned his horses northward, but don't mistake this for defeat. No, the Scourge of God has merely shifted his gaze. The eternal city is spared, but Italy itself, her towns, her fields, her villas, groaning with marble and silver, is still very much at the mercy of the horde. You march with them, and everywhere the soundscape is the same. Iron-shod hooves pounding the soil, the crackle of torches, the shrieks of peasants scattering into the hills. The Huns raid like locusts. Vineyards are uprooted, barns emptied, orchards hacked to the stump. You can almost hear the clink of goblets and jewelry being tossed into saddlebags, the clatter of Roman coins spilling onto rawhide mats. What isn't useful, what can't be carried, is burned. Smoke rises in columns, black streaks against the pale Italian sky. Here's your mainstream fact. Attila's Italian campaign of 452 devastated northern Italy. Cities like Aquileia, Padua, Vicenza, and Verona suffered destruction or abandonment. Refugees poured southward in waves, swelling the population of Ravenna and Rome, desperate for sanctuary. Chroniclers later described whole regions turned into wasteland, where wild beasts roamed where once men had dwelt. But don't picture Attila as a mindless destroyer. He was many things, but never stupid. His raids are strategic. Supplies must be replenished. His army, tens of thousands strong, needs grain, meat, and gold. Italy provides all three in rich measure. So while some towns are razed to ash, others are spared for ransom. A bishop or magistrate offers treasure, and suddenly the Hun banners veer away. A brutal form of negotiation. Call it the first century version of a protection fee. And here's your quirky detail. The Huns had a particular taste for Roman tableware. Imagine warriors who drink fermented mare's milk from leather skins back home, suddenly discovering silver chalices in a looted villa. Some accounts claim they carted off entire dining sets, gilded platters, jewel-encrusted spoons. More fascinated by the glitter than the utility. Picture a Hunnic warlord proudly displaying a Roman candelabrum in his tent, utterly unsure of what it's actually for. Now here's the debate. Did Attila intend To take Rome itself, after all? Or was Italy only ever a raid for spoils? Some argue that famine and plague had so crippled the peninsula that Rome was simply not worth besieging. Others suggest Attila deliberately avoided the city to keep his reputation untarnished. Better to leave Rome trembling in fear than risk a costly siege. A third camp believes the meeting with Pope Leo provided the perfect excuse. Attila could withdraw with honor, his wagons groaning with loot, while still appearing magnanimous. As you ride through Lombardy with the horde, you can feel both triumph and strain. The wagons sag under their loads, bolts of silk, amphorae of wine, statues chipped from temples, prisoners trudging on ropes. The horses, though, are leaner. The men cough more often. Rumors of disease ripple through the ranks. Italy's wealth fills their hands, but Italy's sickness creeps into their lungs. In Ravenna, the imperial court quakes. Emperor Valentinian III can do little but watch the countryside fall apart. Tribute, diplomacy, desperate letters. They all buy scraps of survival. Yet the humiliation is obvious. Rome no longer commands events. It merely reacts, trying to keep the flame of empire alive, while Attila feasts on her provinces. And feast he does. In his great pavilion, Attila presides over banquets, where Roman wines are poured into rough Hunnic horns, where looted delicacies, dates, olives, honey cakes are served beside horseflesh. It's a strange fusion, the barbarian and the imperial, the nomad and the decadent. To your eye, it looks less like victory and more like fate teasing out a new order. By autumn, the spoils of Italy are secure. The wagons creep north toward the Danube, stuffed with treasure and captives. Behind you, northern Italy smolders. Fields lie untended, cities are husks, and wolves prowl where villagers once preyed. Rome has survived, but only just, and only as a ghost of what it was. And Attila? He has never looked prouder. For all the hardship of the campaign, for all the strange retreat at Rome's gates, he rides home as if crowned by destiny. He has shown the world that even the heart of the empire can be picked clean. Her riches hauled off by horsemen from the steppe. You watch the banners flutter against the alpine wind, and you realize this was never about conquering Rome. It was about proving that Rome could be bled. The wagons roll east, groaning under their plunder, and the Italian smoke drifts into memory. Yet, as you ride with Attila's host, you begin to see something that's been there all along, hidden beneath the thunder of hooves, the flash of steel, the roar of raids. Power, you realize, is not just in the man they call the Scourge of God. It is also behind him, beneath him, and sometimes whispering in his ear when the banners are lowered and the campfires dim. You've marched with warriors, you've seen the cities burn. But now, let's pull back the curtain. Let's step inside Attila's world. The tent, the throne, the circle of power that makes an empire of horsemen hold together. The first thing you notice is the tent itself, not the shabby hide shelters of common soldiers, but a massive pavilion stitched from rare fabrics, wool, linen, sometimes even silk, plundered from the east. Its poles are capped with bronze, its rugs are layered thick, and on one side sits a low wooden chair. Not a golden throne, no. For Attila, detested ostentation. He preferred plainness, austerity, even as piles of loot glittered around him. Roman envoys were startled to find a man so feared, sitting on an unadorned seat, drinking from a wooden cup, while his generals flaunted gold. This is one of those mainstream facts. Attila cultivated simplicity. To his followers, it proved he was no weakling, softened by luxury, but a warrior like them. To outsiders, it was unnerving, a conqueror who seemed immune to greed, even while commanding mountains of it. But behind Attila's image stood the machinery of loyalty. His generals, called logads by Greek chroniclers, weren't mere subordinates. They were the lifeblood of his empire. Rugila, Bleda, before he was cut down, and now men like Elok and Dengizic, Attila's sons. And don't forget the chieftains of allied tribes: Goths, Gepids, Alans, Siri, all bound to the Hun banner, not by affection, but by the rewards of plunder and the fear of betrayal. Holding this patchwork together was like riding a half-broken horse. Constant, dangerous, but exhilarating when it worked. At night in camp, you can hear the murmurs. Chieftains bicker over spoils, insult each other's honor, and sometimes come to blows. Attila rarely raises his voice, but when he does, silence spreads like frost. His justice is swift: cattle taken away, sons given as hostages, an unlucky troublemaker executed with brutal finality. Peace, in Attila's world, is always enforced peace. Now, let's add a quirky detail. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Huns were surprisingly superstitious about omens. Before major decisions, Attila's priests, or shamans, as the Romans called them, performed divinations. They would slit open a sheep or a horse, study the entrails, and declare the will of the heavens. There's even a tale that Attila possessed a sacred relic called the Sword of Mars, a weapon said to grant him divine right to rule. Imagine a grim warrior leader striding through camp with a battered old sword, whispered about as if it were forged by gods themselves. But here's where we hit the debate. Was Attila truly the supreme ruler with iron grip? Or was he more of a first among equals in a coalition of steppe warlords? Some historians argue his power rested heavily on charisma, intimidation, and careful balancing between factions. Others point out that he commanded resources, levied tribute, and directed campaigns with the precision of a monarch, closer to a king or emperor than a tribal chief. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Attila the man and Attila the myth were not identical, but each fed the other. Inside his court, the Roman presence was unmistakable. Hostages from noble families, interpreters who bridged Latin and Gothic, and Hunnic, even skilled artisans captured from cities, all swirled around his household. Envoys described banquets where Greek-speaking secretaries took notes, while barbarian guards loomed with spears. Attila's empire was less a nation than a traveling fortress, moving wherever his horse pointed, yet managing, somehow, to behave like a state. And you, sitting quietly at the edge of the great tent, see the strange contradictions. Here is Attila, plain cup in hand, head bowed slightly as his seer mutters over entrails. Behind him, piles of Roman silks. At his feet, chained prisoners who will later be ransomed. Around him, lieutenants snarling at each other, but silenced by his glare. In one corner, scribes scratching reports in Greek and Latin. A nomadic conqueror, but also a ruler who understood bureaucracy, diplomacy, and theater. This is the veil of power, the part that the burning towns never show you. And yet it's fragile. You can feel it. If Attila were to fall, what would hold this host together? Spoils alone cannot bind forever. Fear alone cannot breed loyalty without limit. The storm has a center, and you're staring at it. As the night grows late, the camp quiets. The gold glitters. The banners sag in the wind. And Attila leans back in his chair, wooden cup resting on his knee. Outside, thousands of horsemen dream of conquest. Inside, one man keeps them all tethered. For now. But behind the veil, shadows stir. Sons eager for inheritance. Allies chafing at dominance. Enemies plotting vengeance. The sword of Mars glints. But even sacred steel cannot cut through fate forever. You've marched so long with Attila's horde that the rhythm of hooves feels like a heartbeat. But now, the pulse quickens. Word spreads through the camp like wildfire carried by the wind. The Romans are not broken. And worse, the Goths, the Franks, and countless other peoples have chosen not to kneel, but to rise. The storm the Huns unleashed has stirred its enemies into unity. And that, you realize, is the most dangerous enemy of all. It begins with whispers among the scouts. Riders return from the Rhine with dust-caked faces, reporting strange news. Visigothic banners flying beside Roman eagles. Armor glinting on the plains. Camps of warriors gathered not in fear, but in defiance. Soon, messengers confirm it. A coalition has formed. Perhaps the strangest Europe has seen in centuries. On one side, Attila, master of horsemen, the Scourge whose raids reduced cities to rubble and kingdoms to ashes. On the other, a patchwork alliance of Romans from Gaul, Visigoths under their king Theodoric III, Franks, Burgundians, and even some Alans. These peoples had fought each other for generations, Romans sneering at barbarian allies, Goths nursing grudges against both Empire and Hun, Franks raiding whomever they pleased. But fear makes strange friends, and now all have gathered with one thought. If Attila is not stopped, none of us will have a homeland left. Here's the mainstream fact. This was the lead-up to one of the most pivotal clashes of the 5th century, the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, sometimes called the Battle of Chalons, 451 CE. Chroniclers couldn't decide who won, but they all agreed on one thing. It was one of the bloodiest battles of late antiquity. Tens of thousands, maybe more, fell on that field. Yet before the clash, imagine the tension. The Huns had always thrived on disunity among their enemies, sweeping into fractured lands and crushing one rival at a time. But now the tide had shifted. You can almost hear the campfire grumbling among Attila's lieutenants. These Romans are gathering like ants. The Goths rally like wolves. Are we walking into a trap? Attila's response is telling. He doesn't shy away. He rallies his men with speeches of fire, reminding them that their enemies fear them for good reason, that the gods favor their banners, And in true Attila fashion, he consults his shamans for omens. Here's your quirky detail. Legend has it that before the great battle, Attila built a massive pyre of saddles and vowed that if defeat was certain, he would throw himself into the flames rather than be captured. Talk about drama. Attila basically said, "If I go down, I'm going down in blaze of glory style barbecue." It both terrified and inspired his warriors. But in Gaul, the Allied camp was no less tense. Roman commander Flavius Aetius, sometimes called the last of the Romans, had the unenviable job of holding together this fragile alliance. Some Gothic leaders muttered about desertion. Some Franks eyed their neighbors with suspicion. And the Burgundians, well, they were mostly hoping not to be wiped out. Aetius' genius wasn't just in tactics, but in diplomacy, making each faction believe they had more to lose by leaving than by fighting. And here comes the debate. Historians still argue about Aetius' motives. Did he truly want to crush Attila once and for all? Or was he playing a longer game, balancing powers so that no single group became too strong? Some scholars suggest he even let Attila escape after the battle on purpose, preferring to keep the Huns alive as a counterweight against overmighty Goths. Was Aetius saving Rome, or just keeping the chessboard messy enough that Rome still mattered? In the meantime, the two hosts crept closer, their scouts clashing in bloody skirmishes. Imagine the plains of Gaul, wide grasslands under a bruised sky, the air heavy with dust kicked up by thousands of hooves. The ground shakes as both sides prepare, not just armies, but whole peoples, families trailing wagons, camp followers, slaves, and priests. It isn't just a battle. It's the fate of half a continent piling into a single field. By now, you realize you're standing at the hinge of history. If the Huns win, they might roll through Gaul and Spain, maybe even into the heart of the Western Empire itself. If they lose, the aura of invincibility that clings to them will shatter, and whichever way it goes, the blood spilled will stain the soil for generations. As the sun dips toward the horizon, you hear the thunder, not of a storm, but of war drums. Horns blare across the camps. Attila's riders form into their deadly crescent formations. Across the plain, Visigothic war songs rise, deep and defiant. Romans steady their shields. Alans twirl their lances, and in the fading light, the first arrows fly. The gates of fate have opened. Enemies stand arrayed, and you're about to witness a clash that will echo through the centuries. You've walked through blood and dust with Attila for years now. You've seen him command armies, bend kings to his will, and thunder at Rome's very gates. But here, suddenly, the story changes. It doesn't end with a battle charge or a Roman spear. Instead, it begins with a woman's name whispered like a secret, Ildiko. It is winter, 453 CE. Attila has returned from Italy, his campaigns slowed not by defeat on the battlefield, but by famine, plague, and the stubborn resistance of cities that refuse to fall. His empire still sprawls across the steppes and rivers of Europe, but there's a sense of tension, a flicker of unease. For all his terrifying power, even Attila the Hun cannot ride forever. And then comes a surprising twist. Rather than preparing for another invasion, Attila is preparing for a wedding. Ildiko, we are told, was a young Germanic woman, possibly a Gothic princess, maybe from the tribe of the Burgundians. Sources are slippery here. The Roman chroniclers weren't interested in telling her story in detail, only in how her life intersected with the great Attila. Still, imagine her, a girl pulled into the orbit of the most feared man in Europe, perhaps offered to him as a token of peace, perhaps chosen because of her beauty. Her name itself, Ildiko, has an echo of fire in it. Battle or warrior in some interpretations. Fitting, isn't it? Here's your mainstream fact. The wedding of Attila and Ildiko became legendary, not because of its pageantry, but because it was Attila's last night alive. Picture the feast, a grand tent draped in woven carpets and furs, flickering torches, casting shadows on the walls. Huns drink deep from their horn cups, singing war songs, pounding their chests. Meat roasts over spits, the smell of fat filling the air. Attila, the Scourge of God, sits at the center of it all, crowned not by iron, but by celebration. But as the feast grows wilder, Attila excuses himself to join his bride. He is said to be in high spirits, laughing, confident. For years, his enemies had prayed for this moment, for him to be gone. And now, unknowingly, he is stepping into the last chamber of his story. The quirky detail. According to the historian Priscus, when Attila was found dead the next morning, his warriors wailed so loudly that villagers miles away thought the earth itself was mourning. They scratched their faces until blood ran down their cheeks, a ritual sign of grief, so that the great king would be mourned not by tears, but by wounds. Imagine thousands of men crying out into the sky, their own blood streaking down their skin, like the world itself was tearing open. And here comes the debate, the heart of the mystery. How exactly did Attila die? The official Roman version is that he drank heavily that night, then suffered a nosebleed so severe that he choked on his own blood in his sleep. Not exactly the heroic end you'd expect from the man who terrified half the known world. But some whisper that Ildiko herself played a role, that perhaps this young bride, handed over like a prize, became the knife in the dark. Maybe she smothered him, maybe she poisoned him. Some even suggest she was a plant, sent by enemies who knew Attila's only weakness was in his tent, not on the battlefield. It's impossible to know for sure. Did the Scourge of God really fall because of bad luck with a nosebleed? Or did a bride's hand close the curtain on his empire? History doesn't tell us plainly, which makes the legend all the stronger. The next morning, the Hun camp was shaken. Attila lay dead, and Ildiko, this mysterious bride, was left at the center of it. What became of her, no one knows. Her name fades into silence after that night. Her story swallowed by the cries of warriors who set about building the grand funeral of their lord. And so, Attila's saga doesn't end with Roman spears or Gothic swords. It ends in a wedding chamber, with a woman whose face we can't picture, whose voice we can't hear, but whose presence was enough to topple a legend. The great conqueror who made emperors tremble, who was called the Scourge of God, died not on the battlefield, but in bed, beside his bride named Ildiko. So here we are, back before the curtain falls, when Attila still breathes and the world still trembles at the pounding of Hun hooves. You've watched him storm cities, stare down emperors, and turn fields into graveyards. But now, oddly enough, you're invited not to a war council, but to a wedding. The Scourge of God is getting married, and the camp hums with a very different kind of energy. It is early spring, 453 CE. Winter's grip has loosened on the plains, and with it comes a sense of renewal. The grass is pushing green shoots through the earth, the rivers are swollen with melted snow, and the Hun encampment looks almost festive. Not quite the savage battlefield machine Rome likes to imagine, but a village alive with preparation. Here's your mainstream fact. Attila's marriage to Ildiko was not his first. In fact, the man had many wives and concubines, as was custom among steppe rulers, where marriage alliances were as political as they were personal. But this one feels different. Chroniclers take note of it. Why? Because it was his last. Imagine the preparations. Great hides are stretched to raise massive feasting tents, patched with silks, looted from Constantinople, and dyed cloth stolen from Gaul. Blackened iron cauldrons bubble with broth fattened by goat and venison. Women stir the pots with long wooden paddles, their arms slick with steam, while children run wild, darting between piles of firewood and stacked shields. And then there's the horses, because no Hun celebration is complete without them. Grooms rub them down, braiding their manes with bits of ribbon and bronze trinkets. The animals snort and stamp, sensing the excitement in the air. Some will be raced, others sacrificed. Yes, sacrificed. Because even here, in the shadow of joy, the Huns remember their gods. Horses, sheep, and perhaps even prisoners of war will be offered to Tengri, the eternal blue sky, so that the union is blessed with strength and victory. Now here's your quirky detail. At Hun feasts, meat wasn't just eaten, it was displayed. Archaeological evidence and Roman descriptions suggest that whole animals were sometimes roasted and propped up, heads and hooves intact, so that guests could marvel at the sheer abundance. Imagine walking into a tent and being greeted by the sight of an entire roasted ox, its hide crackling, its mouth stuffed with herbs. A grotesque centerpiece, yes, but also a promise. Here, there is plenty, and Attila can provide. The bride herself, Ildiko, remains a shadow in the sources. Was she shy, defiant, terrified? You can picture her attendants dressing her in layers of linen and wool, combing her hair smooth, weaving in gold threads, or maybe even coins that clink when she moves. She is young, far younger than Attila, and tonight she will be handed to a man whose name makes the strongest warriors go pale. It's a strange kind of glory, isn't it? To be remembered by history, not for who you were, but for whose bed you entered. Meanwhile, Attila himself walks among the preparations. He inspects the gifts: Roman chalices of silver, Germanic torques of twisted gold, Persian fabrics captured in long-ago raids. He laughs with his men, promising the feast will be one to remember. He even orders extra barrels of honey wine and kumis, the fermented mare's milk that froths when poured and bites when swallowed. And then comes the debate. Why a wedding now? Some historians argue it was political. Marrying Ildiko may have been a way to cement alliances with her tribe. Perhaps the Burgundians or Goths, securing Attila's western flank for another campaign. Others see it as a man at the height of his power, indulging in luxury, collecting brides like trophies. Still others wonder if this was, in fact, the beginning of the end. A leader slipping from war-making to celebration, from iron discipline to fatal excess. As evening falls, torches are lit. The air smells of smoke, fat, and spilled alcohol. Drums beat, songs rise, and the camp swells with voices. The people are ready. Tomorrow, they will feast until the ground shakes with their laughter. And in the center of it, all sits Attila, waiting for his bride, the conqueror preparing not for a march, but for a wedding night. The man who has crushed armies and humbled emperors is about to step into a tent that will shape the last chapter of his legend. The feast is set, the wine is poured, and history holds its breath. The torches burn low. The feasting tent, once a thunderous storm of laughter, songs, and pounding drums, now sits like a great beast, exhaling smoke and silence. Outside, revelers stumble into the cold night, clutching skins of wine, collapsing in heaps on the ground, or vanishing into smaller tents for their own pleasures. The spring air carries a sharp edge, but it can't cool the fires that burned inside this night. Fires of excess, of triumph, and of fate. You stand in the hush that follows the storm. Attila the Hun has eaten, drunk, and celebrated like a god among men. Roasted oxen were stripped to their bones. Silver chalices drained again and again. Songs bellowed until voices cracked. The conqueror of empires was at the center of it all, raising his goblet high, demanding another round, his voice booming with confidence. Now, though, he walks unsteadily toward his wedding tent. His eyes glisten, not with fear, but with the intoxication of victory and fermented honey. The feast has crowned him king of this night, and the prize that awaits is his bride, Ildiko. Mainstream fact. What follows is known to history only through fragments of rumor and chronicles written by outsiders, most famously by the Gothic historian Jordanes. He tells us Attila died in the arms of his new bride, Ildiko, on their wedding night in the year 453 CE. The cause? A burst blood vessel, a nosebleed so massive it drowned him as he slept. Others whisper darker tales: murder, betrayal, divine judgment. But in this tent, only two souls truly know what happened. Inside the bridal tent, lamps glow softly. The air is heavy with incense and herbs, burned to bless the union. Rich furs are spread on the floor, and Attila's weapons, his great sword, his bow, his dagger, rest just outside the bedding, gleaming faintly in the firelight. As if standing guard, Ildiko waits. Her face is pale, her hands trembling. She is young, far younger than the man she has been given to, and she carries not just the burden of marriage, but the shadow of legend. She has been told to please him, to honor him, to seal whatever alliance her people have bargained for. Yet one can imagine the churn of thoughts behind her eyes. Does she hate him? Fear him? Or does she simply resign herself to being swallowed by a life she never chose. Attila enters, shedding his cloak, his heavy steps muffled by the furs. He is still drunk from the feast, his cheeks flushed, his breath thick with wine. He raises a cup again. Yes, he has brought one more drink with him, unwilling to let the night end without another taste. He drinks deeply, then sets it aside, eyes fixed on his bride. This is where the quirky detail comes in. Hun wedding nights, according to scattered accounts, often involved more than just intimacy. They could include rituals, blessings, even the symbolic sharing of a horsehair rope, binding bride and groom together as a gesture of unity. Perhaps Attila, in his half-drunken state, insisted on such rites. Or perhaps he waved them aside, choosing instead the raw indulgence of flesh and drink. Hours pass. The camp outside quiets. The fires dwindle. And inside the tent, fate sharpens its knife. Here lies the debate. What truly happened? Jordanes paints one picture. Attila drank too much, lay on his back, and in his stupor, suffered a violent hemorrhage. His nose poured blood, his throat filled, and he choked silently beside his young bride. Others, however, whisper of Ildiko's hand. Did she perhaps slip a blade between his ribs as he slept? Did she smother him with his own furs, desperate to escape the terror of being his bride? Or did she serve him too much wine, watching as excess carried him into oblivion? Still others insist it was the gods. Tengri himself, weary of Attila's arrogance, struck him down on the night he celebrated most. Whatever the truth, when dawn came, the tent was quiet, too quiet. Servants, hesitant, crept forward. They found the great Attila sprawled lifeless, blood dried at his nose and mouth, his body already cold. Ildiko, it is said, sat weeping beside him. But were they tears of grief or tears of release? The Scourge of God was no more, not cut down by Roman steel, not defeated by battlefield cunning, but felled in the intimacy of a wedding tent, on the night meant to celebrate life's continuation. A man who had faced down emperors and torn apart kingdoms was undone by his own body, or by the hidden hand of fate. The camp wailed in disbelief. Warriors who had never feared death found themselves speechless, their leader gone not in glory, but in silence. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed thunder, leaving only stillness. And you? You feel the strangeness of it all. After so much blood, so many battles, so many roaring campaigns, Attila's end is quiet, almost pitiful. Yet in that silence lies the most haunting truth. Not even the Scourge of God could escape the hand of destiny. The wedding feast had promised joy. The wedding night delivered death. And with Attila's last breath, the world shifted. The first pale light of dawn does not break with birdsong in the Hun encampment. It breaks with silence. The air feels heavy, expectant, as if the winds themselves hold their breath. No drums roll, no horses whinny, no warriors bellow in drunken snores. Instead, the heart of the camp lies still, as though some unseen hand has pressed the world into pause. It is inside one tent, one bedchamber, that history itself has stopped beating. The bridal tent smells of musk and smoke, of spilled wine and burned herbs. The bedding, once a trophy of furs and silks, is now stained with a far darker red. Attila lies sprawled, his chest unmoving, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. The conqueror of empires, the terror of Rome, the scourge of God himself, dead. Blood pools beneath him, seeping into the fur-lined bed. His lips are still stained with the honey wine of the feast, but now they are cracked, frozen. From his nose and mouth, a blackened trickle has dried overnight. Some say he burst a vessel in his skull, drowned in his own blood, while too drunk to rise. Others murmur that his bride, Ildiko, played the hand of fate herself. And there she is. Ildiko sits upright beside him, her hair unbound, her wedding dress crumpled, her eyes wide and hollow. Her hands shake, streaked with crimson. She whispers, not in screams, not in sobs, but in low, steady breaths, as though chanting to herself. Did she watch as he choked, paralyzed by fear? Did she push the blade that never left his side? Or did she simply witness, powerless, as the most powerful man in the world bled out beside her? No one knows. But the blood in the bedchamber tells a story of its own. Mainstream fact. Jordanes, the Gothic historian writing decades later, records Attila's death in 453 CE as natural, a nosebleed that suffocated him during drunken slumber. It was a humiliatingly mundane end for such a monstrous conqueror. Yet many contemporaries whispered murder. A Gothic bride, forced into his bed, might have seen her wedding night as the only chance to strike him down. When the first guards dare enter, they recoil. These men, who had marched through fields littered with Roman dead, who had drunk from rivers choked with corpses, now stagger at the sight of their fallen lord. Attila, who was supposed to be unkillable, lies still. Word spreads like wildfire through the camp. Warriors jostle outside the tent, torn between disbelief and terror. Some gnash their teeth, insisting the gods themselves had struck Attila for his pride. Others whisper that Rome has planted assassins in the form of a trembling bride. And still others bow their heads, refusing to speak. For how can mere men put words to the end of their thunder god? The quirky detail comes here. Hunnic warriors, in moments of grief, were known to slice their own faces rather than shed tears. They believed blood was a worthier offering than water. And so, as the news spreads, hundreds of warriors draw their blades, slashing their cheeks, letting red streams mingle with the morning dew. The earth itself seems to drink the sorrow of the Huns. But there is more. In the hushed moments before Attila's death is officially proclaimed, leaders gather in the tent, staring at the crimson sheets, at the lifeless body, at the young widow. A debate rages in silence. Here lies the scholarly debate. Was Attila's death truly natural, or was it assassination? Roman sources, eager to mock their old enemy, relish the tale of the drunken hemorrhage. Yet some modern historians point out how conveniently Attila's new bride is cast in the story. An outsider, a Gothic girl, married against her will. If murder was done, it was the perfect crime, silenced forever by political necessity. Outside, the murmurs grow into wails. The tent flaps quiver as more warriors gather, demanding answers. But no answers come. Only the sight of their warlord, bathed in blood, unmoving. And you, standing in the midst of the scene, Feel the weight of it. This is not a battlefield death, no clash of swords or storm of arrows. It is something more intimate, more unnerving. A man undone in his most private moment. The conqueror who burned cities, who humbled emperors, who scattered nations, laid low not by a legion, but by his own body, or by the frail hand of a bride. The blood in the bedchamber is more than a stain. It is a signal. It marks the end of an era, the crack of a world about to splinter. The Huns had been bound by Attila's will, alone. Without him, their unity is fragile as glass, ready to shatter at the first blow. As the sun climbs higher, the camp prepares not for war, but for mourning. A silence like no other settles over the Huns, and all the while, the blood remains, darkening, drying, sinking into the furs beneath the body of the man who once shook the earth. The bedchamber has become a tomb, and with it, the fate of the Huns shifts forever. The camp does not breathe. For a moment, it is as if the Huns, those storm-born horsemen, scourges of the world, are turned to statues. Their warlord lies cold in his bridal tent, his blood soaking into the furs. Outside, warriors mutter. Inside, leaders pace. The air thickens with a single, terrible question. Was it murder or mishap? You stand near the threshold, where smoke from the fire pit drifts in with the dawn. The sight behind you is unforgettable. Attila's body on the bed, lips darkened, chest unmoving, sheets soaked in crimson. At his side sits Ildiko, the young bride, trembling like a deer surrounded by wolves. She does not weep. She does not flee. She only stares at the floor, as if her silence itself is her defense. The generals of the Huns, Ardaric of the Gepids, Valamir of the Ostrogoths, Elak, Dengizic, and Ernak, Attila's sons, circle the chamber like vultures, uncertain whether the feast is theirs. Some call for vengeance, some demand caution, and all of them seek the truth, though none agree on what it is. Mainstream fact: the earliest written account, from the historian Priscus, suggests Attila's death was an accident, a sudden hemorrhage caused when drunkenness and overindulgence led him to choke on his own blood. Later, Jordanes turned this into a moral tale, the Scourge of God, brought low by his own excess. Yet both sources admit a strange detail, that his young bride Ildiko was present but unharmed. And that raises the question, was she merely a witness or the instrument of his fall? Voices in the tent clash like swords. One general spits the word murder. He points to Ildiko, her hands still red with the blood of her wedding night. Could it not be poison? Could it not be the work of the Romans, sending a bride as dagger disguised in silk? After all, Rome had every reason to end Attila's reign of terror. And what weapon is more precise than a woman bound to his bed? Another counters with mishap. He insists the old warlord was undone, not by treachery, but by his own indulgence. He had drunk too much, eaten too much, demanded too much of his body. Was it not fitting, the general sneers, that the great Attila should die like any drunken soldier in the mud? The sons of Attila snarl at each other. Elak, the eldest, wants the bride executed for suspicion alone. Dengizic leans toward caution, fearing that killing her might fracture alliances. Ernak, the youngest, gazes silently at his father's body, as though trying to understand what fate has written. And then comes the quirky detail, how the Huns test for guilt. Warriors bring forth a heated blade, glowing red from the fire. They believe that the innocent can hold it without harm if the gods so will it. Ildiko is made to touch it. Her hand shakes, her skin blisters, she screams. To some, this proves her guilt. To others, it proves nothing at all. Only that she is human. Beyond the chamber, the camp divides. Rumors run wild. Some claim they heard Ildiko whispering to the Roman gods before the wedding. Others insist they saw Attila drink too heavily. A few mutter that the bride herself was only a puppet, that poison could have been slipped by jealous sons or rival chiefs eager to seize power. This is the scholarly debate that endures to this day. Historians cannot agree. Did Attila choke to death in drunken slumber? Did Ildiko assassinate him? Was there a plot by his allies, or even his Roman enemies? No evidence has survived to prove any version, and yet each theory carries weight. A sudden hemorrhage is plausible, an assassination convenient, a conspiracy almost inevitable in a camp divided by ambition. The leaders, unable to agree, make a choice of silence. They declare to the warriors outside that Attila died as the gods willed it. They will not speak of murder. They will not admit mishap. They will tell the world only that their Lord was taken by fate. But you, standing amid the smoke and whispers, know the truth is not so neat. The blood in the bedchamber does not answer questions. It only asks them. Was it murder? Was it mishap? Or was it both? An accident blessed by fate, seized by rumor, twisted into legend. Whatever the answer, the effect is the same. The Scourge of God is gone, and with him, the glue that held this storm of tribes together begins to dissolve. The arguments quiet. The leaders leave the tent. The bride is left in shadow, half victim, half suspect, her fate uncertain. And in that silence, the first cracks in the empire of the Huns begin to spread. The sky is gray when the morning begins. Clouds hang low above the endless steppe, as though the heavens themselves lean down to witness the sorrow of a people who have lost their storm. The Scourge of God, Attila, son of the steppe, terror of Rome, hammer of Gaul, lies cold. And now, the world watches to see how the Huns will grieve. You stand among them, hearing the first wails echo across the camp. It is not quiet grief. No. Hunnic mourning is thunderous. Men pound their shields with the flats of their swords. Women tear their cheeks until blood runs down. Horses rear and scream as though they too feel the absence of their master. The sound is a storm, a rolling, primal lament that shakes the ground. There is no order at first. Warriors collapse into the dirt, striking their heads until blood seeps from their brows. Mothers hold their infants high, lifting them toward the heavens, shouting Attila's name so that the dead may hear it. Fire pits are overturned, wine spilled, tents torn apart. Grief is chaos, because Attila was not just a king. He was the axis of their world. Without him, the wheel wobbles. Mainstream fact. Priscus and Jordanus both describe how the Huns grieved Attila with wild lamentation, tearing at their flesh and weeping in the open. Some even smeared their faces with blood rather than tears, believing blood was a stronger tribute for such a warlord. It was not just mourning, it was theater, ritual, and proof of loyalty. To grieve loudly was to show devotion. To stay silent could be mistaken for treachery. The chiefs gather near his tent. Arderic of the Gepids wipes blood from his own cheeks and shakes his head. Valamir of the Ostrogoths cuts his hair and tosses it into the fire, a warrior's sign of loss. Attila's sons kneel in the dirt, each carving lines into their own arms. None dare to appear untouched, because to outlive Attila without scars would seem dishonorable. And then, the quirky detail emerges. In the middle of morning, the Huns begin a strange ritual of song. But these are not soft songs of sorrow. They are war chants. Voices rise together, reciting Attila's victories in rhythmic verse. How he crossed the Danube, how he plundered the Balkans, how he crushed Gaul. The camp does not merely weep, it sings of blood and conquest, as if reminding the dead of his glory, or reminding the living what they once were. As the chants thunder, you notice something else. Fear. The warriors grieve, yes, but beneath the tears lurks panic. Who will lead them now? Elak, the eldest son, glowers at his brothers. Dengizich whispers to his supporters. Ernak, the youngest, remains strangely quiet, his dark eyes watching everything. Already the grief of the Huns twists into the seed of division. But for now, grief is the only language allowed. Scholarly debate. Historians argue whether the Huns' mourning was purely authentic or partly performative, a public show of unity designed to intimidate outsiders. Some scholars suggest the wild rituals of bloodletting and lament were staged to remind subject tribes that Attila's death did not mean weakness. Others see it as genuine despair, proof that Attila was more than a warlord. He was nearly divine to his people. The truth may lie between. Real grief, amplified into ritual so powerful it blurred the line between theater and sincerity. Night falls, and the mourning continues. Fires blaze across the camp, not for feasting, but for grief. The Huns feast on sorrow. They pour wine into the earth as though feeding Attila's ghost. They howl to the sky, their voices so loud that Roman scouts on the frontier later claim they heard it miles away. You see warriors stumble through the camp, faces smeared with ash, eyes red from tears and smoke. A mother rocks her child and sings softly, "Do not forget the hand that fed you, the rider who kept you safe." Young men cut their horses' manes short, a sacrifice of beauty for their fallen lord. The entire camp becomes a theater of grief. But beneath it all, beneath the wailing and the chants, there is the weight of an unspoken truth. Attila is gone, and nothing will ever be the same. The Huns mourn him, not only with tears, but with dread, because grief is easy. What comes after grief will tear them apart. For now, though, the steppes echo with sorrow. You hear the grief of the Huns in every crack of a drum, in every howl to the stars, in every drop of blood spilled, not in battle, but in mourning. And you know, this storm is not over. It is only shifting. The night is thick with silence, broken only by the shuffle of hooves and the low moan of wind across the steppe. The great lament of Attila has not ended. It never truly will, but it changes now. What began as chaos, blood, and shouting bends toward ritual, toward a final farewell, unlike anything the Huns have ever given before. The Scourge of God will not be buried like an ordinary king. He will be swallowed by secrecy. You stand near the edge of the firelight, watching the preparations unfold. Attila's body has already been cleansed, dressed in silks, and draped in finery stolen from half the world. Gold torques clasp his neck. A Roman cloak, deep crimson, covers his chest. Across his body lies his sword, the so-called Sword of Mars, said by his people to have been given to him by the gods. Whether it truly fell from the sky or was simply found by a shepherd long ago hardly matters. What matters is that the Huns believe it, because belief makes it real. 3 coffins are prepared. One of iron, one of silver, one of gold. Mainstream fact. According to Jordanus, Attila was buried inside 3 nested coffins. The first of iron, to symbolize his conquests of men in battle. The second of silver, to mark the wealth taken in tribute. And the third, of gold, for his unmatched greatness. This layering was not only symbolic, but practical. The more treasure buried with him, the greater the temptation for grave robbers, unless the burial itself was hidden forever. The chiefs speak in low tones. They argue over who will lead, yes, but for the moment, they are united in one thing. No outsider must ever find Attila's grave. His resting place must vanish into the earth, as untouchable as the man was in life. And so, by torchlight, slaves are gathered. They dig the pit, hollow and deep, hands blistered, faces streaked with sweat. They lower the iron coffin first, then the silver, then the golden shell, each sealing the scourge further away from the living world. Jewels, coins, goblets, and weapons are tossed inside. Entire wagons of plunder vanish into the grave, spoils of Rome, Gaul, and beyond, all to feed the dead. The slaves wipe their brows, their task nearly complete. And then the silence deepens. Warriors surround the pit, faces expressionless, swords glinting. You realize the truth too late. Those who buried Attila cannot be allowed to live. One by one, the slaves fall. Steel flashes, blood spatters across the soil, and the bodies are thrown in after the treasure. The grave is not only filled with gold, but with silence. Silence bought with lives. Quirky. Detail. Later whispers say even the horses of the grave diggers were killed, their bodies hidden to erase all trace of the burial. Some tales claim the river Tissa was deliberately diverted, its waters rerouted to cover the tomb forever. Whether that's exaggeration or not, the spirit of the story is clear. The Huns were determined that no enemy, no Roman, no curious wanderer would ever stand over Attila's bones. As dawn approaches, the grave is sealed, earth piled high, grass stamped down. It looks like nothing more than a patch of plain steppe, anonymous, unmarked, eternal. The mourners disperse, their faces streaked with both ash and relief. Only the chiefs know where the king lies, and they intend to take that secret to their own graves. You glance across the gathering one last time. The sons of Attila, linger, silent, staring at the ground as though trying to burn the memory of the spot into their eyes. Elak clenches his fists. Dengizic paces like a wolf. Ernak remains unreadable, a shadow of calm in the storm. Attila is gone, buried not in glory for the world to see, but in secrecy so deep the world may never know. Scholarly debate. Was Attila truly buried in triple coffins with rivers diverted over his tomb? Or is it a tale woven later, a mix of myth and memory? Some historians argue that the Huns, who lived nomadic lives and left little in permanent stone, may not have buried him with such grandeur at all. Perhaps his burial was simpler, perhaps more in line with steppe tradition, burial mounds, or even sky burial. Yet the tale of the hidden grave fits perfectly with the terror Attila inspired. Even dead, his enemies would never get their hands on him. The secrecy itself may be the most authentic part, and so it ends. The Scourge of God is gone to the earth, his grave hidden beneath soil, secrecy, and slaughter. No stone marks his rest. No monument rises over the steppe. The greatest terror of Rome and Byzantium vanishes into legend, leaving behind not a tomb, but a shadow. And in that shadow, a question lingers. Who will lead the Huns now? The burial is done, but the real storm is only beginning. The sun rises over the steppe, pale and cold, as if reluctant to witness what comes next. Attila is gone, buried in secrecy, sealed away in the earth with treasures and blood, leaving behind a throne no one can occupy comfortably. The Huns, once a roaring storm of conquest, now face a terrifying emptiness. Their king, their unifying force, the Scourge of God, has vanished, and with him, the empire begins to tremble. You walk among the warriors, hearing whispers ripple like wild grass in the wind. The generals no longer roar commands. They argue, bicker, and plot. The sons of Attila, Elak, the eldest, Dengizic, the middle, Ernak, the youngest, circle each other warily, each aware that power is up for grabs. The camp, once unified by fear and loyalty, fractures almost overnight. Mainstream fact. Historically, the Hunnic Empire did not survive long after Attila's death. Within a decade, his sons failed to hold together the vast confederation of tribes. Elak fell in battle against a coalition of subject peoples. Dengizic struggled to maintain authority. Ernak survived longer in the east, but wielded far less influence. The Huns splintered, their unity collapsing as quickly as it had been forged. The factions begin forming immediately. Some chiefs align with Elak, attracted to the strength of primogeniture. Others whisper with Dengizic, tempted by cunning and diplomacy. Ernak, quiet and calculating, moves through the camp like a shadow, aware that the path to survival is patience, not aggression. Each tribe recalculates loyalties, remembering past slights, imagining new opportunities, and yet, the quirky detail surfaces. In the months following Attila's death, some Huns reportedly tried to maintain morale by dressing up in masks painted with Attila's face, pretending he still rode among them, barking orders. It's eerie and almost theatrical. A dead king haunting his own empire. But it speaks to the desperation of a people who cannot yet imagine life without their storm. The steppe, once unified under a single will, becomes a chessboard of rivalries. Trade routes are disrupted. Tributary tribes rebel, sensing weakness. Roman and Byzantine envoys smell opportunity, sending gifts and threats in equal measure to curry favor with whichever son seems strongest. The great fear that kept Europe trembling under Attila's shadow evaporates almost immediately. Scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Hunnic collapse was inevitable due to structural flaws, reliance on fear and charisma rather than institutions, or whether a strong successor could have maintained Attila's empire. Some suggest that the nomadic confederation, bound together largely by Attila's personal authority, could never have endured his absence. Others argue that strategic alliances and careful leadership might have preserved the confederation for generations. Back in the camp, the cracks widen. Elak attempts to assert dominance, but fails to inspire the same awe his father commanded. Dengizic negotiates with allied tribes, but his authority is constantly challenged. Ernak quietly consolidates his followers, avoiding confrontation, choosing survival over glory. Each son's choices create tension, sowing the seeds of betrayal. Even outside the royal family, ambitious generals plot. Some look to carve territories for themselves. Others seek to topple the sons entirely. Bloodshed replaces unity. Raids erupt among former allies. The empire that had once stretched from the Danube to the Black Sea threatens to collapse in on itself. By the end of the first year without Attila, the Huns are no longer the monolithic storm that Europe feared. They are a collection of fractured tribes, still dangerous, still skilled in war, but no longer unstoppable. Their strength, once centralized in one man, is now diffused, scattered like sparks in the wind. And you sense it. History is never kind to those who lose their master. Without Attila, the Huns may still ride, but their thunder is quieter, their strikes less precise, their empire sliding toward ruin. The steppe stretches endlessly before you, empty of a king, full of ambition, haunted by the shadow of a man who once made the world bend beneath his heel. The empire is alive, but it is fragile, and every heart in the camp knows it. The storm has passed, leaving only echoes. The steppe is quiet now, yet its silence is heavy, thick with memory. Attila is gone. His body lies hidden beneath layers of earth and treasure, the secrets of his tomb swallowed by the plains and time. But his legend, oh, his legend, ripples through history like an unending echo, carried on the wind in the stories of survivors, in the trembling voices of those who once feared him. You wander through the remnants of the Hunnic camp. Tents sag, fires are cold, and warriors who once roared at the sound of their master's voice now speak in hushed tones. Some whisper tales of his victories, others murmur warnings. And everywhere, the memory of Attila lingers, palpable as the dust in the air. He is gone from the world of the living, yet impossible to forget. Mainstream fact: Attila's death marked the rapid decline of Hunnic power in Europe. Within a few years, his empire splintered, the tribes scattered, and many were absorbed into neighboring kingdoms. Yet, in folklore and Roman writings, he became a symbol of unstoppable terror. Rome's most feared adversary, the man who could bend kings and emperors to his will. His name alone inspired fear centuries after he vanished. Somewhere, Ildiko survives, her story largely obscured by history, but her presence during that fatal wedding night ensures that the whispers never fade. Was she victim, assassin, witness to destiny? Her role is forever entangled with Attila's demise, a mysterious figure at the edge of legend. Even the children of Attila carry fragments of his terror and charisma. Elak falls early in subsequent battles. Dengizic struggles to consolidate followers. Ernak survives, but wields diminished influence. Yet in each, you see traces of their father's ambition and cunning, a reflection of the storm that once rolled the steppes. Quirky, detail. Legends grow like weeds. Later European folklore paints Attila with almost supernatural traits. Some tales claim he could summon storms to scatter armies, or that he slept with a sword under his pillow and a horse tethered inside his tent. Monks in distant monasteries whisper that his spirit rides the wind across the Danube, punishing those who displease heaven. Even centuries later, his name strikes terror into storytellers, generals, and school children alike. Historians still argue whether the Huns' rapid disintegration was solely due to Attila's absence, or whether structural weaknesses of nomadic empire made collapse inevitable. Perhaps a capable son could have maintained his father's conquests. Perhaps the empire's reliance on terror and charisma instead of governance ensured its fragility. We may never know. What is certain is that the world remembers Attila not for the years he lived, but for the terror he inspired in those he never even touched. The legacy is not only political, it is psychological. Across Europe, from Gaul to Constantinople, leaders teach their children to fear the steppe, to measure armies in dread, to respect the unstoppable. Even long after the Huns have faded into legend, the stories of Attila shape strategy, diplomacy, and imagination. And you, walking through this camp, through history itself, see the truth. Legends outlive bodies, kingdoms crumble, emperors die, and yet a name can haunt centuries. Attila is more than a man. He's an idea, a shadow that lingers over every battlefield where ambition meets resistance. The sun sets, casting long shadows over the plains. Fires smolder, wind whistles through the tents, and the ghosts of the Huns ride silently beside you. You can feel it, the echo of the Scourge of God, still alive in whispers, in fear, in awe. History has swallowed him, yet he refuses to be forgotten. And now, as the night settles and the winds stir the steppe grasses, think about what you've just walked through. Attila the Hun was a man of extremes, united, terrifying, and relentless. His life was a storm of conquest, and his death a quiet, intimate mystery that turned an empire upside down. You felt the thunder of his hooves, smelled the smoke of burning cities, and seen the chaos of grief ripple through his people. You've witnessed not only battles, but feasts, rituals, and secrets buried so deeply that they may never be uncovered. Perhaps the most unsettling part is how fragile power can be. One man can unite tribes, crush armies, and make emperors tremble. And yet, in the end, the same force that gives life to empires can vanish in a single night. Attila's death on a wedding night reminds us that history is unpredictable. Fate, chance, or betrayal can undo the mightiest of figures in moments that seem mundane. The Huns' mourning, the secret burial, and the splintering of their empire show how quickly the world changes when a central force disappears. Yet, paradoxically, his absence magnified his presence. Even in death, Attila became larger than life. Stories, rumors, and legends transformed him into an almost supernatural figure whose shadow stretched across Europe for centuries. It's a reminder that legacy is not about how long one lives, but how deeply one's actions echo. So, as you lay back and let your thoughts drift, imagine the steppe at night, quiet but for the whisper of the wind. Hear the echoes of hooves long gone. Feel the shadow of a man who could bend history, and understand that some legends never die. They ride on forever in memory, story, and the faint tremor of the earth itself. Sweet dreams.